How do you optimize plant DNA potential for maximum growth and pest and disease suppression? Most of us don't realize this, but we are a shell. Inside our shell, our body shell, we have some cells, but for every cell there are 10 bacteria and 100 virus. So we are just a container. So how do we get to the tipping point? I think we are now beginning to understand. Well, I have to confess, when I was in lab school, my first clinical rotation was microbiology. It didn't hurt that the person doing micro was my friend. She was female and she was good looking, but I really liked microbiology. And I think we are now in the area of agriculture beginning to understand the role of the little people and the little things and how they impact us to such large degree. Thomas Edison years ago said, "The doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will interest his patient in the human frame, in diet, and the cause and prevention of disease." So I think if we're careful, if we look at our lifestyle, what we eat, what we drink, how we live our lives, that we'll probably have a far healthier life. What is health? Well, we tend to define health by the absence of disease if we're not careful. I look back on a working lifetime in the healthcare industry, and as I look back at working in the hospital and the nursing home and then private practice for physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech pathology, it was more sick care than health care. I'm sorry. That wasn't really health care. But I look at health as the cure and preferably the prevention of the majority of degenerative diseases and aging by the consistent daily ingestion of a comprehensive full spectrum of disease-fighting plant-derived substances that are bioactive in sufficient amounts while avoiding harmful substances. Now that's a mouthful. Let's see what we can do. Paul Ewald, put bluntly, medicine's successes at vaccination and antibiotics treatment are trivial accomplishments relative to natural selection's success at generating the immune system. Recognizing this fact has important repercussions for the long-term control of infectious disease. We will probably obtain better disease control by figuring out how to tweak further the immune system and capitalize on its vastly superior abilities than by relying on some human intervention such as new antimicrobials, antibiotics, antivirals, or antiprotozoal agents. Organisms tend to maintain homeostasis, moving along in life. Metal ions or minerals are used by these biological systems to catalyze various enzymatic, various functions in the body. The intelligence of nature tends to maintain health. Plants will selectively uptake healthy metals over radioactive particles if given the chance. And so we now know that high levels of radioactivity can overpower that. But we also know that after Chernobyl, those farms that were naturally producing organic vegetables, organic cows, milk, butter, did not have radioactivity in them, where the others did. So many of us are convinced that that deepness of the organic process is what is going to be required to maintain the keel on the boat of growing so that we can move forward. Replenishing these systems with remineralized foods or finely ground rock dust supplement is an important part of coping with this unprecedented radioactive stress. Another symbiosis essential to human agriculture: plants fix nitrogen, and they do it in the bulbous growths on the roots of leguminous plants. Well, what is a legume? Alfalfa, clover, soybeans are all legumes. Not only does the earth contain more bacterial organisms than all others combined, not only do bacteria live in more places and work in a greater variety of metabolic ways, not only did bacteria alone constitute much of life's history, but total bacterial biomass, even at the minimal weight per cell, may exceed all the rest of life combined, even forest trees, once we include the subterranean populations as well. There are more of them than there are of us. So we can either choose to join them or fight them. Elliot Coleman is a proponent of year-round vegetable production, but it goes on beyond that because he uses deep organic techniques, and he uses untreated greenhouses in Bar Harbor, Maine. Now, he selects his plants, I'll give you that. There is shallow organics. Shallow organics is basically, after rejecting agricultural chemicals, the farmers look for quick fix inputs. Trapped in a belief that the natural world is inadequate, they end up mimicking the patterns of chemical agriculture. Buy this, add this input to your growing process. We need, because of this, to be very careful, because this is the next step to conventional agriculture, very closely related, and those people that are accepting of this accept it because it can be very easily controlled. It maintains the dependence on middlemen and fertilizer salesmen. And so we need to be careful. The deep organic farmers, in addition to rejecting agricultural chemicals, look for better ways to farm. Inspired by the elegance of nature's systems, they try to mimic the patterns of the natural world's soil-plant economy. They do this by nurturing the soil to avoid diseases and pest problems, making and using large amounts of compost, and regularly planting cover crops or green manures to enrich the soil and reduce erosion. Basically, deep organic gardening works with nature and follows nature's guidelines as to how things should be grown. It reduces the number of off-site inputs such as fertilizers and mulches, and focuses on growing or producing as much necessary soil building material as possible yourself. So you can see real quickly why I'm a proponent of the deep organic method. Pesticides and inorganic fertilizers are not needed in sustainable agriculture if soil health is maintained. Tillage needs to be reduced to the minimum possible. Disease and pests are not significant in healthy, sustainable systems. Weeds are really just an indication that the system is not healthy. Nature gives growers clues with respect to what is wrong if the information is read properly. We just need to learn how to read the information being given to us. We reserve the use of pesticides and other toxic materials to the rare situation when some unusual event occurs that harms the biology that should be present. Well, what is that biology? Elaine goes further. It's very necessary to have these organisms. They will supply your plant with precisely the right balances of all the nutrients the plant requires. When you start to realize that one of the major roles and functions of life in the soil is to provide nutrient plants in proper forms, then we don't need inorganic fertilizers. We certainly don't have to have genetically engineered plants or to use inorganic fertilizers if we get this proper biology back in the soil. If we balance the proper biology, we select against the growth of weeds, so the whole issue of herbicides is done away with. We don't need the herbicides if we can get the proper life back into the soil and select for the growth of the plants that we want to grow and against the growth of the weedy species. Sounds like heaven to me as a grower. So in our mix, we want to use 15% beneficial bacteria, 70% archaea, and we'll talk about these, and 15% of the right type of fungi. Yes, it's safe. You can take a bath in it if you so choose. But we are going to use compost tea as a foliar feeding. You spray it on the plant. And Elaine Ingham says if you have disease, you need to keep brewing and keep spraying compost tea until the disease quits. And the pH of this compost tea is 3.5 to 4, so it's acid. And it will kill certain microorganisms, but it will supply the effective microorganisms and populate the plant growth with beneficial microorganisms. You can use yucca extract in your compost tea. That will open the plant pores and increase the intake of the foliar feeding. Endomycorrhizal rhizomes are used primarily for vegetables. Ectomycorrhizal rhizomes are for woody species, trees. They increase the root mass 100 to 1,000 times. And not only that, they do it by extending the root reach. They will grow, they colonize around the roots. The roots give off 10 to 30% of the plant sap to feed the biology around the root that supplies the plant with nutrients when the plant communicates. But it goes way on beyond the root and gathers nutrients and moisture way beyond the root reach of the plant. Archaea is the third after the beneficial microorganisms of compost tea and mycorrhizal rhizomes. Archaea are RNA organisms. They don't have a cell body, and they consume energy. They are those organisms that are used for bioremediation, cleaning up oil spills, radiation spills. They reduce the soil to the elemental minerals, and they can be used to clean up a farm that's been conventionally farmed in 1 year instead of 3 years. Now, it won't get you organic certification, but it'll clean you up. And I would suggest that from a thoughtful standpoint, if you're concerned about chemicals from the chemtrails, if you're concerned about radiation for biomagnification from the ocean, if you're concerned about hydrocarbons or anything else, I get and use archaea that consume energy that will clean those things up. How do you do this? You have a compost tea brewer. You want plenty of oxygen. This has a pump on it, and it pumps oxygen to keep an aerobic culture of compost tea instead of an anaerobic culture. That oxygen prevents disease and decay. The earth tea brewer is the best, and you can notice there the washington.osu.edu. You can go on the web, print the manual off. It has everything you want to know and more about compost tea in it. But she has said that it's important to view the soil food web as a complex whole system. Biology, soil, air, water, all of it goes to, and the various minerals, all of it goes together to make up the whole. You want a container with a spigot. That way you can draw off the liquid, the liquor of the process. You want a bubbler or diffuser to put your oxygen and keep your brew aerobic. You want rich compost. I used Terraganics. Dr. Tara Haga had the original essential microorganisms. I buy it in a gallon, and you just pour that into your brewer. You have your rich compost. You use that as an inoculant. You feed them molasses with no preservatives, because these are active, alive organisms, and you will then be able to use that compost tea as a foliar feeding. It will provide food for your essential microorganisms, and a number of people have used this. Vineyards have used it, compost tea instead of fungicides, and it reduced their fungicide use from 12 sprays to 2. 2 sprays cost as much as the year's worth of brewing of beneficial biology. So they saved money, and they saved chemical load as well. John Evans is a blue ribbon vegetable grower up in Palmer, Alaska. You might say, well, what's so magical about Alaska? Well, Alaska has good, raw, natural soil. They have a moist condition, but they have more growing sunlight hours during the summer than anywhere in the continental U.S. And so that's the area to grow it. He grows some top-notch vegetables. He was talking to Guy McGowan, of who markets archaea, and he was saying that his cabbages had been running 43 pounds, and Guy said, well, you need some archaea, and that'll really help it go. Now, John Evans has a tea kit, compost tea kit. He will sell you the whole stuff and you can do all this. My problem is, most of these things you can buy parts and pieces of, and if you know, you can put it all together and have it for quite a bit less. So Guy sent him some archaea, and he went from 43-pound heads of cabbage to 110-pound heads of cabbage. All good. I bought a 110-pound watermelon a couple years ago from my friends in the Plain community. All good. It took them to the third church meal before they could get rid of it all. But other than that, it was all good. We now have what is known as MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, and it can get in wounds, and there is currently no known cure from a generally accepted medical standpoint. There is a new strain that has a mortality rate of 50% instead of the usual 11% mortality rate. There's a VRE, vancomycin-resistant enterococcus, which is 100% fatal in cases of septicemia. There's a resistant strain of tuberculosis. There's a penicillin-resistant Streptococcus pneumoniae. Clostridium difficile has developed a new strain that has new virulence and antibiotic resistance. Pseudomonas aeruginosa and Actinobacter baumannii are not resistant to any known drugs. Some of this was there when I was doing microbiology years ago in the hospital lab. The question is, how are we going to counteract this? Dr. Paul Allwater says the patients are sicker than ever before, so we're using antibiotics more intensively and bacteria are changing. We are literally inches away from a crisis in public health that will severely hamper our ability to transplant organs, replace hips, provide cancer chemo, perform dialysis, and keep premature babies alive. Then it will only be a matter of time before otherwise healthy individuals will die because they contracted infections after routine surgery or were infected by pathogens that are common in the community but for which we no longer have a cure. That's coming about right now and today. For instance, we have now discovered that stomach ulcers are caused by a Helicobacter pylori. And they showed that you can give antibiotics and it will get rid of the stomach ulcers, but it also showed that those who tested for H. pylori were 59% less likely to have asthma and 40 to 60% less likely to have hay fever or rashes. So we treat for one thing and the kids get something else as a result. So what's the bottom line for all of this? After Chernobyl, the cheeses that were remineralized as well as the biodynamic cheeses, the cheeses that came from cows that were on organic pasture, organic cows, measured no radioactivity whatsoever. Austrians would stand in long lines in order to buy these safe, remineralized products. Well, if it'll do it for the cow, will it do it for me? Remineralization protects not only soil and plants for radioactivity, but humans too, supplying abundant minerals, especially trace elements, to the human body improves radiation tolerance, immune system integrity, and radiation exposure recovery. Well, a probe sent 2 miles underground in a South American gold mine found bacteria living down there. Their dinner? Radioactive emissions from the rocks around them. Above ground, those bacteria can handle radiation exposure nearly 10,000 times the fatal dose for humans. We have not discovered the end and the knowledge that we need to, that nature has available for us. So what do? I would suggest that first we need to study. We can look at nature as God's second book and the generosity that He has given us through nature and the variation in nature. But I ask you the question, who is going to win? There are more of them than there are of us. And as we evolve and change to be more resistant or less resistant, are we going to win or are they going to win? They're going to win. There are more of them than there are of us. So we need to get our immunity increased. We need to, we need to get our hands in the dirt. My dad used to tell me, don't worry, that's just part of the ton of dirt you'll eat in your lifetime. And what we now know, that's coming true. That's a lot of where we get our immunity. So do some research. T&J Enterprises talks about yucca extract. It talks about bricks. Alaska Giant and Bounty are John Evans things. Fresh and Alive is Ken Rolla's site. You need to look at it. Mycorrhizae, Biosome is where you look for Archaea, Fresh and Alive, EM Brewing Guide and Applications. And then there's the compostjunkie.com, how to make compost tea. On the outside, it looks fairly complicated. But on this side, when you realize that we can brew the beneficial things that supply us, we're going to talk about fermentation. Natural sauerkraut that's unheated, 1/4 of that, 1/4 cup of natural sauerkraut has more probiotics than that whole bottle of probiotics that you get. That's beneficial microorganisms.